On the morning of September 24, 1908, 3 days after the floodwaters began to fall, a rancher named Thomas Whitaker walked down toward the Paluxy River outside Glen Rose, Texas, looking for what the storm had taken from him. A section of fence was gone. 2 calves were missing. The river, which only days earlier had been a violent wall of mud and broken timber, had pulled back into its channel, leaving behind branches, dead grass, torn roots, and the raw white surface of limestone that had not seen daylight in years. Whitaker carried a rope over one shoulder and a shotgun in the crook of his arm, not because he expected trouble, but because men in that part of Texas rarely walked far from home without one. He was not looking for a mystery. Then he stopped. Pressed into the newly exposed rock in front of him was a depression almost 3 feet long. Not round, the way water carves potholes. Longer than it was wide. Narrow at one end, wider at the other. With a shape that seemed, in the flat morning light, to spread outward at the front. Almost like toes. Whitaker took a step forward and saw another one. Then, another. The impressions continued across the stone in a line, spaced far enough apart that no animal he had ever seen could have made them. Some were damaged. Some were half-filled with silt. But several were clear enough to suggest motion. 1 foot placed after another, crossing this riverbed long before the flood, long before the fences, long before Glen Rose itself existed. He called for his brother-in-law. Then for 2 men working a nearby fence line. By noon, 5 people were standing in the riverbed. By evening, half the settlement had heard the story. The flood had uncovered tracks in the stone. Giant tracks. And some of them, according to the first men who stood over them, looked disturbingly human. Within weeks, the most unusual stones would be gone. To understand what Whitaker found, you first have to understand what he was standing on. The Paluxy River cuts through Cretaceous limestone, rock formed roughly 113 million years ago, when this part of Texas was the floor of a shallow inland sea. The people of Glen Rose did not need a university course to know the stone was ancient. They found shells in creek banks. They built walls and porches from fossil-bearing slabs without always knowing what they were. The land was practical. Stone was building material. A riverbed was a crossing. That was about to change. Because the moment a strange mark in stone became valuable, it stopped being evidence. It became property. The first accounts of the 1908 tracks arrived not as scientific reports but as talk. A rancher saw something. A neighbor measured it. Children were brought to the river. A local preacher reportedly called the marks the footsteps of an older world, a phrase that spread faster than any careful measurement could follow. Within days, people were arriving at the exposed riverbed with ropes, rulers, and boots, trying to make sense of what the water had uncovered. One man laid his shoe inside a depression and said the track was nearly twice its length. Another stretched a rope between 2 marks and said the stride was longer than a tall man lying flat. A boy was lowered into a deeper impression and told later he could sit inside it with his knees bent. Whether those descriptions were exaggerated is impossible to verify. But the witnesses were not describing one isolated shape. They described a sequence, a trail, something that moved. The larger animal tracks were extraordinary but manageable. Enormous 3-toed impressions that even without formal paleontology could be understood as the marks of a creature from deep time. People could accept that. It was strange, but it was distant. The controversial prints were something else. They were longer, narrower. Some appeared to have a heel. Some had a shape that widened toward the front. A few, according to later retellings, showed suggestions of an arch. They looked, to the people standing over them, like the footprints of a very large man. That is where the case breaks open. Because if those marks were only distorted dinosaur tracks, misread by exhausted, excited ranchers who wanted to see something impossible, then the story belongs to the history of human pattern recognition and frontier legend. But if any of them were what they appeared to be, embedded in rock laid down more than 100 million years before humans existed, then the timeline of life on Earth had a problem. The stones were the only way to know. And the stones started disappearing almost immediately. The removals began before anyone fully understood what was at stake. A rancher wanted to preserve a print before the river covered it again. A storekeeper thought a slab with a track would draw customers. A man figured he could sell one to a traveling collector. Someone cut a block and placed it near a barn as a local curiosity. In a world without fossil protection laws, this was not unusual. People took things from riverbeds all the time. But the pattern of the removals is what makes the skeptical explanation incomplete. The most disputed slabs, the elongated ones, the ones that looked least like animal tracks, the ones people argued about, were among the first to go. A limestone slab is heavy. Moving one from a riverbed is not casual work. You need tools to cut around the print. You need men to pry the block loose. You need a wagon to haul it over rough ground. The disappearance of specific slabs was not an accident of weather. It required decision, effort, and purpose. The question is whose purpose? Some removals were driven by money. The early 20th century rewarded wonder. Traveling lectures, county fairs, local curiosities, revival meetings, a stone with a giant footprint could draw a crowd, and a crowd could be charged for. A print that remained mysterious was worth more than one that had been explained. Some removals were driven by belief. For religious communities, human-like prints in Cretaceous rock could serve as physical evidence against the emerging scientific consensus that separated dinosaurs from humans by tens of millions of years. A slab was not just a fossil. It was an argument. It could be displayed not as a question but as proof, and kept by the people controlling the display. And some removals may have been driven by something quieter, fear of what the argument would bring. Scientists, newspaper men, outsiders with credentials and authority, arriving to tell the people who found the tracks what they had actually seen. The result of all three forces acting at once was the same. The stones that mattered most were the ones that moved first. By the time anyone with formal training arrived to examine the trackways, the original scene was already gone. This is where Whitaker re-enters the story, not as the man who found the tracks, but as the man who watched what happened to them. He was still living near the river in the months after the discovery. He saw the men come with chisels. He watched slabs leave on wagons. He was present, according to one account passed down through his family, when a man he did not recognize spent the better part of an afternoon cutting around one of the elongated prints and refused to say who had sent him or where it was going. Whitaker reportedly asked. The man did not answer. He finished his work, loaded the stone, and drove away. That exchange, a rancher watching a stranger remove the center of his own discovery, with no authority to stop it and no institution to call, is the quiet center of this case. Not dramatic. Not conspiratorial. Just a man standing on a riverbank watching something irreplaceable disappear into someone else's wagon. By then, a schoolteacher from a nearby town had come to sketch the impressions. Her drawing, according to a later family account, showed one large three-toed track crossed near its edge by a longer, narrower depression. The notebook was stored in a trunk and later lost in a house fire. A photographer who arrived to document the site found the controversial prints gone, submerged, or too damaged to photograph clearly. His images of the remaining dinosaur track survive, but they do not show what Whitaker saw on the morning of September 24th. A third slab, taken to private property and kept under a shed for years, was eventually broken during a move. The pieces were used in a wall. Whether that was carelessness or quiet disposal is impossible to say. 3 secondary records. 3 disappearances. Each one following the same pattern. A piece of evidence appears briefly, is noted by someone without the authority to secure it, and then vanishes in a way that cannot be distinguished from accident. This is how evidence dies. Not always in a locked archive. Sometimes in a barnyard. Sometimes under a porch. Sometimes as a fragment of limestone that no one remembers was once the center of an argument. The official explanation, when it finally formed, was serious and should be taken seriously. Cretaceous limestone in Texas preserves dinosaur tracks. Mud collapses. Toe marks distort. Erosion lengthens impressions. Water wears away the claw and edge details that identify a three-toed dinosaur print, leaving behind a long, vaguely foot-shaped depression that a person might, genuinely, honestly, mistake for a human footprint. Local excitement, religious expectation, and commercial interest can transform ambiguous marks into something that fits a pre-existing story. That is a legitimate argument, and any honest investigation must acknowledge it. But a serious argument does not erase the missing evidence. It makes the missing evidence more important. If the controversial prints were obviously distorted dinosaur tracks, why were the most disputed slabs not preserved for comparison? If they were natural erosion features, why did multiple witnesses independently describe sequence, stride, and repeated shape? If the whole thing was frontier exaggeration, why did the removals target the elongated prints first, the ones that most needed to be tested, rather than the dramatic three-toed tracks that would have drawn larger crowds? The skeptical explanation accounts for what the witnesses may have seen. It does not account for why the stones that could have settled the argument were the ones that disappeared. A footprint does not exist alone. Its meaning depends on the trackway around it. Direction matters. Spacing matters. Depth matters. The angle of pressure matters. The surrounding stone matters. A single removed slab, stripped of its neighbors, stripped of its orientation, stripped of the sequence it belonged to, cannot tell you what the original surface showed. Take any depression out of its context, and it becomes whatever the person holding it needs it to be. That is exactly what happened to the Glen Rose prints. The riverbed became a courtroom after the evidence had been carried away. The dispute that followed lasted decades and, in some forms, has never ended. Scientists pointed to what remained and explained it. Believers pointed to what was missing and accused. Collectors displayed their slabs at revival meetings and roadside attractions. Skeptics published articles. Documentaries were made. Arguments were had in church halls and academic journals and rural Texas kitchens, all of them circling the same absence at the center. And Whitaker. He kept living near the river. He watched the town grow. He watched the tourists arrive. He watched men he had never met become authorities on something he had found while looking for missing calves on a wet September morning. In the few accounts that quote him directly, he does not claim certainty about what he saw. He says only that what the flood exposed was not like anything he had seen before, and that the stones that would have answered the question left before the question was properly formed. He was not a scientist. He was not a preacher. He was not a collector or a skeptic or a man with an argument to make. He was the first person to stop walking and look down. And what he saw that morning, whatever it was gone before the world agreed on how to look at it. The honest ending to this case is not a declaration that giants crossed Texas. The evidence does not support that. It is not a verdict that everything was misread erosion and frontier imagination. The missing evidence prevents that certainty too. The honest ending is this. In September 1908, a flood exposed something in the Paluxy limestone that Thomas Whitaker and his neighbors believed was extraordinary. The clearest explanation for most of what they saw is ancient animal tracks, natural erosion, and the human tendency to find familiar shapes in ambiguous stone. But the specific evidence that could have tested the strangest claims, the elongated prints, the ones that looked least like anything categorizable, was removed before any systematic examination could take place. Removed by ranchers, collectors, believers, businessmen, and at least one man who drove away without answering a question. The stones vanished. The arguments remained. And more than a century later, somewhere, built into a wall, buried under a shed, sitting in a private collection labeled as a curiosity, or broken into pieces that no one alive connects to that September morning, one of those slabs may still exist. A piece of limestone cut from the Paluxy Riverbed in 1908. A long depression across its face. Maybe a weathered dinosaur track. Maybe a natural feature. Maybe exactly what Thomas Whitaker thought it was when he stopped walking and called the others down. It will never tell us the whole truth. Because the truth was not only in the mark. It was in the sequence, the spacing, the direction, the neighboring prints. The riverbed itself, exposed for a few weeks between one flood and the next, seen clearly by the people who had no instruments to measure it and no authority to protect it. That is what vanished. Not just the stones. The moment before anyone had decided what the stones were supposed to mean.